I asked some other very specific questions. I asked about Manic Farm, and I asked about the allegations of torture and ill treatment that took place in the aftermath of the conflict with allegedly of camp residents, and that allegedly by the CID, the Criminal Investigation Department, and the TID, the Terrorist Investigation Department. This was part of our review in 2011, and it seems to have been overlooked. And I specifically asked for information from any member of the delegation, but I addressed my comments to one member of the delegation, Mr. Sisira Mendis, who was with us yesterday and today, but who hasn't spoken. Now, Mr. Mendis, I said you were, as far as I knew, responsible for supervising the work of the CID and TID during the immediate aftermath of the conflict when you were serving as Deputy Inspector General of the Police. And I specifically asked you yesterday, the web is now up, by the way, for anybody who's looking for yesterday's review, it's now up on the web, on the UN website, webtv.un.org. I asked if you could share any information with us about the conduct of interrogations that took place at Manic Farm and at Vivunia Hospital. I cited the information from the Secretary General's panel of experts about cases of torture perpetrated by CID and TID during the interrogations at both locations. I asked about time. I asked about supervisory efforts. I asked if you were physically present at these locations in May and June, and what steps were taken there. And I haven't heard any response about that. Since yesterday, the internet seems to have exploded, and Reporters Without Borders, Journalists for Democracy in Sri Lanka, the International Truth and Justice Project, and others have been writing about you, Mr. Mendis. And they say that you indeed oversaw the CID and TID. And in fact, I don't need them to tell me that, because I have the High Commissioner's Office's report, the OISL report, which in paragraph 134 says that the CID is primarily responsible for investigating services and organized crimes, but also counterterrorism activities, and it talks about the so-called fourth floor at police headquarters in Colombo, which it says, and I quote, is particularly notorious as a place where many detainees are taken for interrogation. And then it says, in April 2009, the Deputy Inspector General of the CID was Sisira Mendis, unquote. In paragraph 553 of the OISL report, it tells us that the commonly used centers, such as the Joseph Military Camp in Vivunia and the CID fourth floor in Colombo, quote, had rooms that were set up with torture equipment, illustrating the premeditated and systematic nature of the use of torture by units of the Sri Lankan security forces, unquote. And then they describe some of that equipment in detail, and it's quite arresting, quite grim. So, Mr. Mendis, it's very unusual for this committee to have a person who's had the experiences you have before us. You're now Chief of National Intelligence in the Ministry of Defense. You had command responsibility for the CID and TID at that time. Can you elaborate for us specifically how you interacted with military intelligence? Can you tell us whether you or officers under your responsibility jointly interrogated persons deprived of liberty together with military officers, or together with members of the TID, which were co-located there? Do you have any information about Vivunia Hospital? It's located nearby the Manic Farm. It was said to be a site from which people were involuntarily disappeared. What knowledge do you have of any persons from Vivunia Hospital who were interrogated by CID and TID units? Was there a registry kept, a database on this? Is it available? What knowledge did you also have of interrogations that took place we were told that people were separated, male and female, and then interrogated, and that there was a huge proportion of sexual abuse, including rape and other forms of violence. Do you have any specific knowledge of that? Can you give us any information on the cases that were raised by NGOs regarding the events there?
Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General. We thank you for the replies provided. We had hoped for more replies. We had hoped that there were not a lot of unanswered questions, particularly those relating to Mr. Mendis. Nevertheless, we hope that some of the replies will be kept within the written reply within the 48 hours, and we look very much forward to those replies.